It's July the 8th, 1892. In a small town in Argentina's Buenos Aires province, local police have been investigating a horrific crime. 2 young children, a boy and a girl, have been murdered. Both their throats slit wide open. Their mother, 27-year-old Francisca Rojas, has the same wound, but she's alive. The knife, it seems, didn't cut deep enough to kill her. Local police, however, are struggling to find any leads. So they've called in Inspector Eduardo Alvarez from the city to help. Alvarez first talks to Francisca, the only survivor of the attack. She claims she's innocent and instead blames her neighbor, Pedro Ramon Velázquez, for the crime. Alvarez first talks to Francisca, the only survivor of the attack. She blames her neighbor, Pedro Ramon Velázquez, says he's responsible for the crime. But when Alvarez checks out Pedro, it turns out he has a solid alibi. He was with friends on the night that the children were killed. Instead, after further investigation, Alvarez learns that Francisca's boyfriend once said that he'd marry her if only it weren't for those 2 brats. Alvarez then searches the murder house, and after some careful inspection, he spots something that everyone else missed. A little smudge on the bedroom door. It's a bloody fingerprint. Trained by Juan Vucetic, one of the pioneers of fingerprint identification, Alvarez knows exactly what this could mean. He cuts out the piece of the bedroom door, takes a copy of Francisca's fingerprints, and sends everything to Vucetic. The prints are compared, and voila! It's a perfect match. Confronted with the evidence that her blood-stained fingerprints were found at the scene of the crime, Francisca breaks down in tears and confesses. She killed her own children, she says, and then cut her own throat to make it look like it was an attack. As far as we know, this was the first case to ever be solved using fingerprint evidence, and Francisca Rojas was the first criminal to be convicted by it. The case also pushed Argentina to scrap its old system for identifying criminals, which relied on measuring their bodies, and to switch fully to fingerprint records. The rest of the world soon followed. In 1902, the UK convicted its first criminal using fingerprint evidence, 41-year-old London labourer Harry Jackson. But not everyone was convinced about the new method. One letter to the Times newspaper, signed by a disgusted magistrate, said, quote, "Scotland Yard, once known as the world's finest police organisation, will be the laughingstock of Europe if it insists on trying to trace criminals by odd ridges on their skins." How wrong, of course, this magistrate would be. Just a year later, prisons in New York started using fingerprinting records, and they were soon followed by the FBI. And then in 1910, the US finally joined the club and convicted its first criminal through fingerprint evidence too. After breaking in the home of Clarence Hiller, S.A.ing his wife and fatally shooting Hiller, Thomas Jennings left his fingerprints on a freshly painted railing as he fled. And those prints put him behind bars. By the early 20th century, fingerprints had become the gold standard for catching criminals the world over, and today they're still one of the most powerful tools that police have. But how does fingerprinting actually work, and how reliable is it? Let's take a look. So, every time we touch something, we leave a fingerprint behind. Fingerprints are the microscopic patterns of ridges and furrows, or raised lines and grooves, in other words, that form on your fingers and thumbs. You also have them on your palms, toes, and feet. These prints contain water, dead skin, and oil, plus tiny amounts of potassium, sodium, chloride, and iron. On top of that, there can also be traces of whatever's in or on our bodies, such as food, cosmetics, and drugs. Together, all of these substances combine to form a print that sticks to the things that we touch. The patterns on our fingertips that shape these prints, which can also be seen on our toes, palms, and the soles of our feet, are called friction ridges, or epidermal ridges. They're mostly designed to help us grip smooth objects, and they form before we're even born, usually around the 13th to 15th week of fetal growth. No 2 people on the planet have the same set of fingerprints, not even identical twins, and they don't change as we age. Even if our fingers are damaged, say, with cuts or burns, the skin usually heals back to reveal the same fingerprint pattern. Some criminals have even tried to erase their fingerprints, either through plastic surgery or, like the American gangster John Dillinger, by burning them with acid. But in many cases, including Dillinger's, the ridges are still recognisable afterwards. Even if the prints are left with permanent damage, the scars themselves can become part of the unique pattern. And this means that either way, barring some very rare genetic conditions that leave people with no prints at all, you can always be singled out among billions of people by your fingerprints. This is why they're so useful for identifying people, and it's why today we use them for everything from employment background checks, device security, disaster relief efforts, and of course, solving crimes. For over a century, police have used fingerprints to link suspects to crime scenes, connect crimes to one another, and build up a record of someone's past offences. There are 3 main fingerprint patterns, and if you look at your fingers, you'll have one of these. The most common pattern is a loop. Around 60% of people have these. They curve back on themselves in a kind of U-shape. The second most common pattern is a whorl. These look like little circles or spirals, and about 35% of people have these. And then finally, there are arches. These are the rarest type, clocking in only about 5% of people, and they look like simple waves, or, as the name suggests, arch shapes. Of course, these 3 patterns alone don't make our fingerprints unique. What really sets them apart are the tiny details within the main pattern, called minutiae. When you combine all of the ridge endings, splits, and little islands in the main pattern of your fingerprint, that's what makes it one of a kind. And people have known about fingerprints for thousands of years. According to some historians, in the old Babylonian Empire, around 1800 BC, officials were already taking the prints of people they had arrested, and by 200 BC, Babylonians were pressing their fingerprints into contracts as a form of signature. Over in China during the 7th century, fingerprints were even being used to both identify people and to collect evidence from crime scenes. Whether these ancient societies really understood the uniqueness of fingerprints, though, or whether they were just using them as kind of signatures, historians still aren't entirely sure. By the 14th century, though, the realization was clear. As the Iranian physician Rashid al-Din Hamadini put it, quote, "Experience shows that no 2 individuals have fingers exactly alike." But it wasn't until the 1800s, nearly 400 years later, that people started to investigate fingerprints as a form of crime scene evidence. In 1858, an Englishman named Sir William Herschel, who was working in India, started making locals stamp their fingerprints onto contracts and deeds to prevent fraud. Not long after, Henry Fords, a Scottish surgeon studying ancient clay in Tokyo, realised that fingerprints could act as a form of ID and be recorded using printing ink. He even suggested the idea of a fingerprinting system to the UK's Metropolitan Police. The Met, however, dismissed it. But Fords also wrote to none other than Charles Darwin, who passed the idea to his cousin, Sir Francis Galton. Galton became obsessed. He started collecting thousands of fingerprint samples and then published the world's first ever fingerprint classification system in 1892. And then in 1897, the world's first fingerprint bureau was founded in Kolkata, India. Its system, developed under the supervision of Met Police Commissioner Sir Edward Henry, refined Galton's work into the Henry classification system, and this quickly became the gold standard worldwide. By the early 1900s, police forces everywhere were convicting criminals through their fingerprints, albeit very slowly, as they combed through the records by hand. Fast forward to the 1980s though, and Japan, thanks to the rise of computers, had launched the first automated fingerprint identification system, or AFIS, and it caught on. Suddenly, investigators around the world could search millions of fingerprint records in seconds. Over the years since then, AFIS has been improved into a fully integrated 24/7 system that links multiple police agencies and can hold hundreds of millions of records. Meanwhile, fingerprint scanners now use all kinds of tech, including optical, electrical, and ultrasonic scanners, as well as thermal sensors, which can all store and match fingerprints instantly. But despite all these advances, lifting fingerprints from the scene of a crime is still a difficult, hands-on task. Fingerprints recovered in the wild are rarely perfect. Smudges, dirt, and other contaminants often cover up the details, and most of the time they're completely invisible to the naked eye. So, how do forensic teams actually make sense of them? Well, unless they're staring at a set of blood-stained fingerprints like Inspector Alvarez did in Argentina, forensic teams are most often searching for latent prints. These are made when oils, sweat, or other substances from the skin transfer the fingerprint pattern onto a surface. Latent prints are invisible and far more difficult to collect. Everything depends on which surface investigators suspect the prints may have been left on. Fortunately though, investigators have a full toolbox of techniques for every scenario, and new methods are constantly being developed. Fingerprint powder is usually the first go-to. Brushed over a smooth surface, this powder then sticks to the oils in the print and makes it visible. Investigators then photograph the print and lift it with clear tape for evidence. It's a simple technique, but it's not perfect. The powder can also smudge certain details or contaminate the print altogether. Another popular technique involves putting the object with a possible fingerprint into a sealed container with heated superglue. The glue then vaporizes and binds to protein and amino acids in the fingerprint, creating a permanent 3D outline. Add a dye, shine a light, and the print practically glows. This method is especially useful on objects like guns, where oils or dirt make traditional powders tricky. There is something that forensic teams need to watch out for here though, and that is that if you heat the glue too much, it can vaporize into cyanide gas. And if you've seen our video on cyanide poisoning, you'll know just how serious this can be. For more fragile surfaces though, investigators can also use black magnetic powder. And instead of using a brush here, like with normal powder, investigators wave a magnetic wand over the surface, which gently pulls the powder across the print to reveal it. This doesn't work so well if there's a lot of moisture around though, say on a bottle splashed with beer. Everything will just end up being covered in the powder. For porous surfaces like paper, chemicals work best. Ninhydrin, for instance, reacts with amino acid to turn prints purple once exposed to heat or steam, while DFO makes prints glow yellow under a blue-green forensic light. And for bloody prints that are almost invisible, there's amido black, which reacts with blood proteins to create a jet black impression of the print. Investigators can also use alternative light sources, such as lasers or LEDs with filters, to coax out prints on tricky surfaces like doorknobs or desks. The right wavelength can make a hidden print pop out, ready to be photographed and logged as evidence. When it comes to matching these fingerprints to existing records though, things get a little more difficult and it's not a perfect science. Some studies even go so far as to claim that there's no credible evidence to show that latent human fingerprints can be reliably matched. There are companies, like the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST for short, which are working on algorithms to automate the comparison of fingerprints. Ultimately though, this process still relies completely on human judgment. Latent prints are often impartial, distorted, or faint, and there isn't always enough detail to even complete an analysis. When there is, though, the examiner starts with a broad pattern, the loop, wall, or arch, to narrow down the possibilities. Then they zoom in on the tiny minutiae and look for matches. If enough points line up, they can confidently say both prints came from the same person. The investigator doesn't always need to state how many similarities they've found, but they should be able to explain their workings. Computers can help to map key points on the fingerprint and search local or national databases for similar patterns and possible matches, but a trained examiner always reviews the results to make the final call. Now, you might be wondering if your fingerprints are in the system, and I'd like to assume that none of us will be caught red-handed at a crime scene anytime soon, but say you were framed for something, could the authorities match your prints? Each country has slightly different laws over when and how you might be required to give your fingerprints to the authorities. In the US, Canada, and the UK, the authorities can take fingerprints from anybody who's been lawfully arrested, or if they've given consent, and these prints can be stored indefinitely depending on the case. In the UK, things are a little bit stricter though, because fingerprints can only be given with consent or if someone has been arrested for a serious offence, while in the EU, fingerprints can only be collected, stored and shared for clearly defined purposes, such as specific criminal investigations. It's a different story in Asia though, where fingerprints are often used for ID cards or passports. India, for example, stores the biometric data of over 1.3 billion people in its Aadhaar database, and its National Automated Fingerprint Identification System holds over 10.6 million criminal fingerprint records. China, meanwhile, has raised serious concerns over human rights and mass surveillance with its collection of biometrics. Reports indicate that the government has taken DNA samples, including fingerprints, from people without proper oversight or consent. Fingerprinting has come a long way to reach this point, and it seems that biometric data in general is set to become even more sophisticated. Eye scans, for example, are already highly accurate. Retinal scans can analyze the unique blood vessel patterns at the back of your eye, while iris scans, which are used in many airports today, can capture over 200 unique features such as rings, freckles, and furrows. Ear scanning is another emerging technique which uses the unique shape and structure of your outer ear to create biometric profiles. There's DNA fingerprinting too, which already plays a major role in forensic science by linking suspects to crime scene evidence through their blood, hair, and skin. And there's the introduction of AI-driven biometrics today. Think advanced facial recognition, behavioral analysis, and fingerprint reconstruction. This technology is likely to become standard in the future. We're becoming more and more traceable as the year goes on. And who knows, maybe one day there'll be nowhere left at all for criminals to hide.